The stagecoach lurched violently as it navigated the treacherous mountain pass, throwing Catherine Mills against the worn leather seat for what felt like the 100th time since departing Denver 3 days prior. Through the dust-caked window, she caught glimpses of towering pine trees and rocky precipices that seemed to drop into endless valleys below. The Rocky Mountains of Colorado Territory were nothing like the gentle rolling hills of Ohio she had left behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Catherine adjusted her navy blue traveling dress and straightened her bonnet, trying to maintain some semblance of propriety despite the bone-jarring journey. At 28, she was older than most mail-order brides, a fact that had made her arrangement with Samuel Hartwell all the more remarkable. His letters had been refreshingly honest about seeking a mature woman who could handle the challenges of frontier life rather than a young girl dreaming of romance. The correspondence had begun 6 months earlier when Catherine responded to Samuel's advertisement in the Cincinnati Herald. Prosperous mine owner seeks educated bride for companionate marriage. Must be practical, literate, and willing to embrace frontier life. Mining experience is preferred but not required. Serious inquiries only. What had drawn Catherine to this? Particular notice was its straightforward tone and the mention of education being valued. Her own situation in Cincinnati had become increasingly desperate. The textile mill, where she had worked for 8 years, was closing, and opportunities for unmarried women of her age were severely limited. The small inheritance from her late parents had dwindled to nearly nothing, and the prospect of depending on her married sister's charity was unbearable. Samuel Hartwell's proposal offered dignity, security, and perhaps most importantly, a chance to start fresh in a place where her past wouldn't define her future. Their exchange of letters had revealed Samuel to be a thoughtful correspondent. He wrote of his silver mine, the Celestial Star, located in the booming town of Silverbrook, Colorado. The mine was producing well, he explained, and he owned considerable property in town. More importantly, he seemed to understand that marriage was as much a practical arrangement as an emotional one. He needed a wife who could manage his household and potentially assist with the business aspects of mining operations. Catherine needed security and respect. It seemed a fair exchange. The stagecoach driver's shout jolted Catherine from her thoughts. "Silverbrook coming up, folks. End of the line." Catherine peered through the window as the coach began its descent into a valley nestled between steep mountain slopes. Silverbrook sprawled along a winding creek, its buildings a mixture of hastily constructed wooden structures and more substantial brick edifices. Mine shafts dotted the surrounding hillsides, like dark eyes watching over the settlement. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and even from a distance she could see the constant activity of a prosperous mining town. The coach rolled down the main street past the Grand Palace Hotel with its ornate facade, a general store with Morrison and Sons painted across its front, and several saloons whose swinging doors revealed glimpses of men in work clothes and mining gear. Catherine noted the bank, a sturdy brick building that spoke to the town's financial stability, and a church steeple rising above the other structures. It was larger and more civilized than she had expected. As the stagecoach pulled to a stop, in front of the Wells Fargo office, Catherine gathered her belongings and prepared to meet her intended husband. Samuel had written that he would be waiting for her arrival, and she had spent considerable time imagining their first meeting. Would he be pleased with her appearance? Would she recognize him from his brief description? Would they find common ground beyond their correspondence? The driver helped her down from the coach, and Catherine stood for a moment, breathing the thin mountain air and adjusting to solid ground after days of travel. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, and the sound of Mining operations echoed from the surrounding hills. Men in work clothes moved purposefully along the wooden sidewalks, while well-dressed gentlemen emerged from the bank and hotel. It was a town very much alive with commerce and ambition. Catherine scanned the gathering crowd, looking for a man matching Samuel's description. Tall, brown hair beginning to grey at the temples, likely wearing a suit befitting a successful mine owner. Several men were approaching the stagecoach, but none seemed to be looking for her specifically. She checked the small watch pinned to her dress. The coach had arrived precisely on time, as Samuel's letter had indicated it would. Miss Catherine Mills. Catherine turned to find a middle-aged man in a black suit approaching her. He was shorter than she had expected Samuel to be, with thinning hair and a solemn expression that immediately put her on guard. "Yes, I am Catherine Mills," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "Are you Samuel Hartwell?" The man removed his hat, revealing a completely bald crown. "No, ma'am. I'm Harold Bennett, the town undertaker." He paused, his discomfort evident. "I'm afraid I have some very difficult news to deliver." Catherine's stomach tightened with dread. The formal way he introduced his profession, combined with his obvious reluctance to continue, could only mean one thing. "What has happened to Mr. Hartwell?" "Ma'am, I'm very sorry to inform you that Samuel Hartwell was killed 4 days ago. He was found dead at his mine site, shot by claim jumpers who were trying to steal his silver deposits." The words seemed to echo strangely in Catherine's ears, as if spoken from a great distance. She had travelled nearly 1,000 miles to marry a man who was already dead when she boarded the stagecoach in Denver. The irony was almost too much to comprehend. "Shot," she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "By claim jumpers." "Yes. Ma'am, Sheriff Morrison is investigating, but these claim-jumping incidents have been increasing lately. There's been a lot of tension between established miners and newcomers trying to muscle in on existing claims." Catherine sank onto a nearby bench, her leather valise dropping to the dusty ground. The reality of her situation was beginning to settle in. She was stranded in a frontier mining town, knowing no one, with barely enough money for a return journey to Ohio and no home to return to even if she could afford the passage. Did he suffer?" she asked, though she wasn't sure why the answer mattered. Bennett's expression softened. "The sheriff says it was quick, ma'am. Samuel was a good man, well respected in town. His death has shocked everyone." "I see." Catherine tried to process this information logically. "Mr. Bennett, I appreciate you coming to inform me, but I'm not quite sure what I should do now. I've come all this way to marry Mr. Hartwell, and now—" "Actually, ma'am, that's why I sought you out specifically." Bennett glanced around, then lowered his voice. "There's someone who wants to meet with you, Samuel's business partner. He asked me to bring you to his office as soon as you arrived." "Business partner?" Catherine was surprised. Samuel had never mentioned having a partner in his letters. He had always referred to the mine as his own operation. "Yes, ma'am, Mr. James Crawford. He and Samuel had a partnership agreement for the Celestial Star mine. He's been handling Samuel's affairs since the incident." Catherine stood, smoothing her skirts and trying to regain her composure. Meeting with Samuel's partner seemed the logical first step in understanding her circumstances. Perhaps he could provide more details about what had happened, or at least help her make arrangements for her return east. "Very well, Mr. Bennett. Please lead the way." They walked down the main street, past businesses that were beginning to close for the evening. Catherine noticed the curious stares from passers-by, word of her arrival having apparently spread quickly through the small community. She held her head high, maintaining what dignity she could under the circumstances. Bennett led her to a 2-story building with Crawford Mining Enterprises painted in gold letters across the front window. The ground floor appeared to be offices, while the upper level might have served as living quarters. It was one of the more substantial buildings on the street, built of brick rather than the hastily constructed wood frame structures that dominated much of the town. Inside, the office was furnished with quality pieces that spoke to successful business operations. Maps of the surrounding mining district covered one wall, while another displayed framed certificates and legal documents. A large desk dominated the center of the room, covered with ledgers, correspondence, and what appeared to be mining reports. "Mr. Crawford," Bennett called toward a door leading to a back office. "Miss Mills has arrived." The man who emerged was nothing like Catherine had expected. James Crawford appeared to be in his mid-30s, tall and lean with dark hair and penetrating blue eyes. His clothing was well-tailored but practical, more suited to someone who spent time both in offices and at mine sites. There was an intensity about him that suggested a man accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Miss Mills," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Crawford. Thank you for coming. I realize this must be an extraordinary shock for you." Catherine accepted his handshake, noting the calloused palms that confirmed he was more than just an office-bound businessman. "Mr. Crawford, I confess I'm quite bewildered by the entire situation. Mr. Hartwell never mentioned having a business." "Partner," Crawford exchanged a glance with Bennett. "Harold, thank you for escorting Miss Mills here. I believe we can handle matters from this point." The undertaker nodded and departed, leaving Catherine alone with this stranger, who apparently had some connection to her deceased intended husband. She remained standing, uncertain of the proper protocol for such an unusual situation. "Please, sit down," Crawford said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I imagine you have many questions, and I'll do my best to provide answers." Catherine settled into the chair, arranging her skirts carefully. "Mr. Crawford, first I would like to understand the nature of your partnership with Mr. Hartwell. His letters to me always indicated that he was the sole owner of the Celestial Star mine." Crawford nodded, moving to pour water from a pitcher into 2 glasses. He offered one to Catherine before seating himself behind the desk. "Samuel preferred to present himself as the primary owner in most social situations. Our arrangement was somewhat unusual. I provided the initial capital for establishing the mine, while Samuel handled the day-to-day operations and served as the public face of the business." "A silent partner, then," Catherine said, beginning to understand. "Exactly. Samuel had the mining experience and the personality for dealing with workers and townspeople. I had the financial resources and business connections. It worked well for both of us." Catherine sipped the water, grateful for something to do with her hands, while she processed this information. "Can you tell me what happened to him?" "Mr. Bennett mentioned claim jumpers, but I would like to understand the circumstances." Crawford's expression darkened. "Samuel was working late at the mine site, which wasn't unusual. He often stayed after the other workers had gone home to examine new ore, samples, or plan the next day's operations. Someone shot him from ambush, then tried to file new claims on his richest veins. They were caught. The claim jumping attempt was discovered when they tried to register the paperwork with the Territorial Mining Office. But the actual killers..." Crawford shook his head. "Sheriff Morrison has suspects, but no definitive proof yet." Catherine absorbed this information, trying to understand how it affected her own situation. "Mr. Crawford, I appreciate you taking the time to explain these circumstances to me, but I'm not entirely sure why you asked to meet with me. I realize my journey here has been wasted, and I'll need to make arrangements to return east as soon as possible." Crawford leaned forward in his chair, his expression becoming more intense. "Actually, Miss Mills, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. Your journey hasn't been wasted." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I understand." "Samuel spoke of you often in the weeks before his death. He was genuinely excited about your impending arrival and marriage. He had made extensive preparations for your life together. including additions to his house and arrangements for your role in managing certain aspects of the mining operations. That's very kind, but Mr. Hartwell is dead, Mr. Crawford. Whatever. And plans he made are now impossible to fulfill. Not necessarily. Crawford stood and moved to a wall, safe, working the combination with practiced efficiency. He withdrew a thick document and returned to his desk. Samuel and I had a comprehensive partnership agreement that covered various contingencies, including the death of either partner. Catherine felt a strange sense of unease. What sort of contingencies? Crawford opened the document, pointing to a specific section. In the event of Samuel's death, his share of the mining operations would transfer to his heirs. If he had no children, it would pass to his wife. If he was unmarried at the time of death, certain provisions could still be activated under specific circumstances. Mr. Crawford, I was never actually married to Samuel. We had a correspondence and an agreement, but no legal ceremony took place. True, but Samuel was quite forward-thinking in his legal arrangements. Crawford turned the document so Catherine could read it. This clause specifies that if his intended bride had already begun the journey to Colorado at the time of his death, and if she was willing to honor the original agreement, the partnership would recognize the marriage contract as binding. Catherine stared at the document, struggling to comprehend what he was suggesting. Are you saying that you want to honor Samuel's marriage proposal even though he's dead? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In a manner of speaking, yes. The legal framework allows for it, and frankly, the mine operations could benefit from your involvement exactly as Samuel had planned. But that's completely irregular. I came here to marry Samuel Hartwell, not to enter into some business arrangement with his partner. Crawford sat back in his chair, studying her carefully. Miss Mills, may I ask about your circumstances back in Ohio? Samuel mentioned that your situation there was not entirely comfortable. The question touched on Catherine's deepest concerns. She had indeed left Ohio with no real prospect of returning to a better life. Her employment was gone, her savings nearly depleted, and her options severely limited. Still, the suggestion Crawford was making seemed almost scandalous. My circumstances are my own concern, Mr. Crawford. Of course they are. I'm simply suggesting that you might want to consider your options carefully before making any hasty decisions. About returning east, Catherine stood, moving to the window that looked out onto Silverbrook's main street. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting the town in golden light. It was undeniably beautiful, and she could see why Samuel had chosen to make his life here. But the idea of remaining under such unusual circumstances seemed impossible to contemplate. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Crawford? I'm proposing that you fulfill the role Samuel envisioned for you. You would have a comfortable home, a secure income from your share of the mining profits, and meaningful work helping to manage the business operations. The only difference would be that instead of being Samuel's wife, you would be his heir and my business partner. Catherine turned back to face him. And what would people think of such an arrangement? A woman living alone in a mining town, involved in business affairs typically reserved for men. People will think what they choose to think, regardless of your actions. But I suspect most would respect a woman who chose to honor her commitments, even under difficult circumstances. The proposition was unlike anything Catherine had ever considered. It offered financial security and personal independence, but it also placed her in a highly unconventional position that could subject her to considerable gossip and speculation. I need time to consider this, Mr. Crawford. It's been a very long day, and I'm still adjusting to the news of Samuel's death. Crawford nodded. Of course, Samuel had arranged for you to stay at the Grand Palace Hotel until the wedding. I've taken the liberty of extending that arrangement indefinitely while you make your decision." He stood and moved to a coat rack near the door, retrieving a leather portfolio. "These are Samuel's personal papers related to the mine operations, including his plans for involving you in the business. You might find them helpful in understanding what he had envisioned." Catherine accepted the portfolio, noting its substantial weight. Samuel had clearly put considerable thought into their future partnership, even if it was a future that could no longer exist as originally planned. "There's one more thing," Crawford said as they prepared to leave. "Samuel's funeral is tomorrow, a morning at the church. I think he would have wanted you there, regardless of what you decide about staying in Silverbrook." Catherine nodded. Attending Samuel's funeral seemed the least she could do for the man who had offered her a new life, even if that life had been cut tragically short. As Crawford walked her to the Grand Palace Hotel, Catherine found herself studying the town with new eyes. Instead of seeing it as a temporary stop before returning east, she began to consider what it might be like to make Silverbrook her permanent home. The prospect was both terrifying and oddly appealing. The hotel lobby was elegantly appointed for a frontier establishment with polished wood furnishings and gas lighting that created a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The desk clerk, apparently expecting her arrival, provided a room key without requiring payment. "Dinner is served until 9 o'clock, ma'am," the clerk informed her, "and breakfast begins at 6. Catherine's room on the second floor was comfortable and clean, with a view of the mountains that was breathtaking even in the fading light. She set Samuel's portfolio on the writing desk and sat heavily on the bed, finally allowing herself to fully absorb the events of the day. She had awakened that morning in Denver, anticipating her wedding to a man she had never met. Now she was contemplating entering a business partnership with his associate, a man who was essentially a stranger, but who seemed to understand her situation with remarkable clarity. The knock at her door came as she was unpacking her few belongings. She opened it to find a young woman holding a tray of food. "Compliments of Mr. Crawford, ma'am," the girl said. "He thought you might prefer to dine in your room tonight." Catherine accepted the tray gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since breakfast. The meal was simple but well prepared: roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread that spoke to the surprising amenities available in Silverbrook. As she ate, Catherine opened Samuel's portfolio and began reading his detailed plans for their life together. His vision had been remarkably comprehensive, covering everything from household management to her potential role in analyzing ore samples and maintaining mining records. He had clearly valued her education and practical experience, seeing her as a true partner rather than simply a wife who would manage domestic duties. The more she read, the more she understood James Crawford's proposal. Samuel had essentially outlined a business partnership disguised as a marriage, recognizing that a woman of Catherine's capabilities could contribute significantly to the mining operations while gaining the security and respect that came with being a property owner rather than merely an employee. Outside her window, Silverbrook settled into evening quiet, punctuated by the distant sounds of the mining operations that never completely ceased. Catherine found herself drawn to the window, looking out at a town that could potentially become her home if she had the courage to accept Crawford's unprecedented offer. The question was whether she possessed the strength to build a life so different from anything she had ever imagined, in a place where her past truly wouldn't matter and her future would be entirely of her own making. Dawn broke over Silverbrook with the metallic ringing of pickaxes against stone, a sound that Catherine Mills was learning defined the rhythm of life in this mountain town. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with images of a man she would never meet and questions about a future she had never imagined. The black dress she had packed for formal occasions would serve a different purpose today, attending the funeral of her intended husband. The Grand Palace Hotel's dining room buzzed with morning conversation as Catherine entered for breakfast. Conversations paused as she passed, and she felt the weight of curious stares from miners, businessmen, and townspeople who had undoubtedly heard about the mail-order bride whose groom had been murdered before her arrival. She chose a small table near the window, positioning herself to observe the room while maintaining some privacy. "You must be Miss Mills." A woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Catherine looked up to see a well-dressed lady in her 40s approaching, her expression kind but cautious. "I'm Martha Morrison, wife of the sheriff. I wanted to introduce myself and express my condolences." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. That's very thoughtful." Catherine gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, join me if you'd like." Martha Morrison settled herself gracefully, her manner suggesting someone accustomed to social situations. "I hope you don't mind my approaching you directly, but I thought you might appreciate having someone to talk with. Silverbrook can be overwhelming for newcomers, especially under such tragic circumstances." Catherine appreciated the woman's directness. "I confess, I'm still trying to understand exactly what happened to Mr. Hartwell. The details I've received have been rather sparse." Martha's expression grew serious. "It's been quite shocking for everyone. Samuel was well respected here, very involved in community affairs. The idea that someone would kill him for his mining claims." She shook her head. "My husband has been working tirelessly to find the perpetrators." "Has he had any success?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about the investigation. "Some leads, but nothing conclusive yet. The claim jumping has been increasing lately. There are men who come into the territory thinking they can simply take what others have worked years to develop." Martha leaned forward slightly. "Between you and me, there have been threats against other successful mine owners as well." This was new information that James Crawford hadn't mentioned. "Other threats?" "Oh yes. The Williamson brothers, who own the Lucky Strike mine, reported men asking suspicious questions about their operations, and old Pete Mackenzie found evidence that someone had been surveying his claim without permission." Martha lowered her voice. "Some folks think there's an organized group trying to force out the established miners." Catherine absorbed this information, filing it away for future consideration. "Mrs. Morrison, may I ask you about Mr. Crawford? I met with him yesterday, and I'm trying to understand his relationship with Samuel." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. "James Crawford? Well, he's been in Silverbrook about 3 years now. Keeps mostly to himself, though he's always been cordial in business dealings. Most people didn't realize he was partners with Samuel until after the murder." "That's interesting. Why do you think they kept their partnership secret?" "Hard to say. Some business arrangements are private by nature." Martha paused, choosing her words carefully. "Though I will say that James has always struck me as someone with secrets. Not necessarily bad secrets, mind you, but he's not the type to share personal information readily." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, weathered man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Martha, there you are." He removed his hat as he approached. "And you must be Miss Mills. I'm Sheriff Ben Morrison." Catherine stood as he extended his hand. "Sheriff Morrison, I'm pleased to meet you, though I wish the circumstances were different. Indeed, I was planning to speak with you today about Samuel's case. Would you have time to stop by my office after the funeral?" "Of course, Sheriff. I'd be happy to help in any way I can, though I'm not sure what assistance I could provide." Sheriff Morrison exchanged a glance with his wife. "Actually, Miss Mills, your correspondence with Samuel might contain information relevant to our investigation. Sometimes victims mention concerns or threats in their personal letters that don't make it into official reports." Catherine nodded, though she felt a slight unease about sharing Samuel's private letters. "I'll review them and bring anything that might be helpful." After the Morrisons departed, Catherine finished her breakfast while observing the other hotel guests. Two men at a corner table were speaking in low voices about mining claims and territorial regulations. A well-dressed gentleman near the door was reading what appeared to be mining reports while drinking his coffee. The entire atmosphere of the town seemed focused on the business of extracting silver from the surrounding mountains. As she prepared to leave for the funeral, Catherine was approached by the hotel clerk. "Miss Mills, this came for you this morning." He handed her an envelope with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, she found a brief note. "Miss Mills, welcome to Silverbrook. I knew Samuel well and would like to speak with you about his plans for the mine operations. Would you be available to meet this afternoon?" Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, assayer's office. Catherine was intrigued. A female assayer was unusual enough to warrant attention, and the note suggested this Dr. Hartman had specific knowledge about Samuel's business operations. She tucked the note into her reticule, adding it to her growing list of people to meet. The church service for Samuel Hartwell drew what appeared to be most of Silverbrook's population. Catherine was escorted to the front pew by James Crawford, who had arrived at the hotel precisely on time, wearing a somber black suit. The simple wooden church was filled to capacity with men in work clothes sitting alongside well-dressed businessmen and their families. The minister, Reverend Peters, spoke of Samuel as a man who had contributed significantly to the community's growth and prosperity. He mentioned Samuel's work with the town council, his support for the new schoolhouse, and his reputation for fair dealing with his employees. What struck Catherine most was the genuine sorrow expressed by the townspeople. Whatever else Samuel had been, he was clearly mourned by those who knew him. During the service, Catherine studied the faces around her, trying to understand the community Samuel had been part of. She noticed several men who seemed particularly affected by the loss, including an elderly man with scarred hands who was quietly weeping, and a group of younger men in miners' clothing who kept glancing toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. After the service, as the congregation filed out, Catherine was approached by numerous townspeople offering condolences and introductions. She met the bank president, several store owners, the doctor who had treated Samuel's injuries, and a surprising number of women who expressed genuine warmth toward her despite her unusual circumstances. "Miss Mills," a gruff voice called as she stood outside the church. Catherine turned to see an elderly man with weathered features and hands marked by years of mining work. "Name's Pete Mackenzie. I worked with Samuel for 6 years. He was a good man, fair and honest." "Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. That means a great deal to hear." The old miner glanced around, then moved closer. "Miss, there's things about Samuel's death that don't sit right with me. If you're planning to stay in town, you might want to be careful who you trust." "What do you mean?" Mackenzie's eyes darted toward where James Crawford was speaking with several other men. "Samuel was worried about something the last few weeks before he died. Kept asking questions about who was buying up mining claims, who was making inquiries about established operations. He thought someone was planning something big." "Did he share his concerns with the sheriff?" "Said he was going to, but wanted to gather more evidence first. Samuel was thorough that way, never made accusations without proof." Mackenzie's expression grew troubled, but whoever killed him made sure he never got that chance. Before Catherine could ask more questions, Crawford appeared at her side. "Catherine, are you ready to head to the cemetery?" Mackenzie touched his hat brim and melted back into the crowd, leaving Catherine with more questions than answers. The burial service was brief but dignified, held in a small cemetery overlooking the town with a view of the surrounding mountains. As dirt was shoveled onto Samuel's coffin, Catherine felt a profound sadness for the life that had been cut short and the future that would never exist. After the burial, Crawford walked her back toward town. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his concern seeming genuine It's been overwhelming, Catherine admitted. I keep thinking about all the plans Samuel made, all the preparations for a life we'll never have. He was very much looking forward to your arrival. In our last conversation, he mentioned feeling more optimistic about the future than he had in years. They walked in silence for several minutes before Catherine spoke again. Mr. Crawford, Pete. Mackenzie suggested that Samuel was concerned about something before his death. Did he share any worries with you? Crawford's stride faltered slightly. Pete mentioned that, did he? Samuel did express some concerns about unusual activity around various mining claims. Nothing specific, just a general unease about outsiders asking too many questions. But he didn't report these concerns officially. Samuel preferred to have solid evidence before making accusations. It was one of his admirable qualities, though, in this case, Crawford's voice trailed off meaningfully. When they reached the hotel, Crawford stopped. Catherine, have you given any more thought to our conversation yesterday? I have, though I'm still far from reaching a decision. There are many factors to consider. Of course, take all the time you need. In the meantime, if you'd like to see Samuel's house and get a better sense of what your life here might look like, I'd be happy to show it to you. Catherine was curious about the home Samuel had prepared for their marriage. That would be helpful. Yes, excellent. Shall we say tomorrow morning? I have some business matters to attend to this afternoon. After Crawford departed, Catherine returned to her room and retrieved the note from Dr. Hartman. The assayer's office was located on Main Street, just a few blocks from the hotel. Catherine decided to walk there, using the opportunity to explore more of Silverbrook and get a feel for the community she might potentially join. The town was more substantial than it had appeared from the stagecoach. In addition to the businesses she had already observed, there was a photography studio, a millinery shop, a lawyer's office, and even a small newspaper office with Silverbrook Weekly Herald painted on the window. The level of civilization was impressive for a frontier mining town. The assayer's office occupied the ground floor of a two-story building near the mining supply store. A sign in the window read, Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, Certified Assayer, Ore Analysis and Mining Consultation. Catherine knocked on the door and was invited to enter by a woman's voice. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman was perhaps 40 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical style and intelligent hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. She wore a leather apron over a simple brown dress, and her hands showed the stains of chemical work. The office contained various scientific instruments, scales, and bottles of chemicals arranged on sturdy wooden tables. Miss Mills, thank you for coming. I'm Elizabeth Hartman. She extended her hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to professional interactions. Please, have a seat. Catherine settled into a chair across from Dr. Hartman's desk, noting the diplomas on the wall and the general atmosphere of serious scientific work. Your note mentioned that you knew Samuel well? Indeed, I did. Samuel was one of my regular clients. He brought ore samples to me for analysis at least twice a week, and we often discussed the geological aspects of his mining operations. Dr. Hartman leaned forward. He also spoke of you frequently in recent weeks. What did he say? He was excited about your arrival, of course, but more specifically, he was pleased to have found someone with the intelligence and practical experience to help with the business aspects of mining. He showed me some of your letters and was impressed by your questions about ore processing and market prices. Catherine was surprised. I only asked those questions to better understand his work. I have no actual experience with mining operations. Perhaps not. But Samuel recognized that you had the analytical mind necessary to learn quickly. He had specific plans for involving you in quality control and record keeping. Dr. Hartman paused. He was also concerned about certain irregularities he'd been noticing in his mining operations. This was the third person to mention Samuel's concerns. What sort of irregularities? Someone had been surveying his property without permission. He found equipment marks and measurement stakes in areas where no authorized surveying should have been taking place. Additionally, some of his highest quality ore samples had gone missing from his office. Catherine felt her interest sharpen. Missing ore samples? Samuel kept samples of his best finds locked in a safe in his office at the mine. When he went to show them to a potential investor last month, several of the most valuable specimens were gone. The safe hadn't been broken into. Whoever took them had the combination. Did he report this to the sheriff? Dr. Hartman's expression grew troubled. He was planning to, but he wanted to investigate further first. Samuel was methodical about such things. He didn't want to make accusations without being absolutely certain of his facts. Dr. Hartman, may I ask why you're sharing this information with me? Because Samuel trusted you, and because I believe his death was connected to these irregularities. Someone was gathering information about his mining operations for a specific purpose, and when Samuel began to investigate, they killed him to prevent discovery. Catherine absorbed this information, feeling pieces of a puzzle beginning to form. In her mind, do you have any theories about who might be responsible? I have suspicions, but like Samuel, I prefer evidence to speculation. Dr. Hartman stood and moved to a filing cabinet, withdrawing a folder. However, I can share some facts that might be relevant. These are the assay reports for ore samples from various mines in the area over the past 6 months. She spread several papers across her desk. Notice anything unusual? Catherine studied the reports, though much of the technical terminology was unfamiliar to her. However, one pattern did stand out. Several different mines seem to have discovered unusually rich silver deposits recently. Exactly. And all of these discoveries were made by mines that have changed ownership in the past year. Dr. Hartman pointed to specific entries. The Lucky Strike, sold to new owners in March. The Mountain View, purchased by an investment group in June. The Silver Bell, bought by a mining consortium in August. You think these sales are connected? I think someone has been identifying the most promising mining properties and either purchasing them or arranging for their current owners to vacate them. The implication was chilling. You believe Samuel was killed because someone wanted his mine? The Celestial Star has some of the richest silver deposits in the entire district. If someone was systematically acquiring the best mining properties, Samuel's operation would certainly be a prime target. Catherine studied the reports more carefully, noting the names of the new owners and the dates of the transactions. Dr. Hartman, who would have access to assay information for multiple mines. Anyone in the mining supply business, certain government officials, and, she paused meaningfully, financial investors who specialize in mining ventures. Like James Crawford? Dr. Hartman met her gaze directly. I'm not making accusations, Miss Mills. I'm simply providing information for you to consider as you make decisions about your future. Catherine gathered the reports, studying the pattern of ownership changes. May I keep these? Of course. Samuel, trusted you to make good decisions based on complete information. I'm simply continuing that tradition. As Catherine prepared to leave, Dr. Hartman added, Miss Mills, if you decide to stay in Silverbrook, please be very careful. Samuel's death may not be an isolated incident, and anyone asking too many questions about mining operations could find themselves in similar danger. Walking back to the hotel, Catherine's mind raced with the new information. The picture emerging was of a systematic effort to acquire the most valuable mining properties in the area, with Samuel's death potentially being part of a larger conspiracy rather than a simple claim-jumping incident. The question that troubled her most was James Crawford's role in all of this. As Samuel's silent partner, he would certainly benefit from Samuel's death if he inherited full ownership of the Celestial Star Mine. His offer to honor the marriage contract could be a way of maintaining the appearance of legitimacy while gaining control of Samuel's assets. But if that were true, why would he offer her a partnership? Why not simply arrange for her to return east and claim full ownership of the mine himself? Unless, Catherine realized with a chill, he needed her for some other purpose. Perhaps her presence lent credibility to his claim of partnership, or perhaps he required her signature on certain documents to complete the transfer of ownership. As she entered the hotel, Catherine made a decision. Before she committed to anything, with James Crawford, she needed to understand exactly what Samuel's legal arrangements had been and whether Crawford's version of their partnership agreement was accurate. Tomorrow's visit to Samuel's house would provide an opportunity to search for additional documents and perhaps gain a clearer picture of what she had truly inherited in coming to Silverbrook and what dangers she might be facing as a result. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silverbrook as Catherine made her way to meet James Crawford for the promised visit to Samuel's house. She had spent a restless night reviewing Dr. Hartman's assay reports and Samuel's letters, looking for any clues that might explain the pattern of mining acquisitions or Samuel's growing concerns in his final weeks. Crawford was waiting outside the hotel with a horse-drawn buggy, dressed in practical work clothes rather than his usual business attire. "Good morning, Catherine. I thought we'd drive out to Samuel's place so you can get a proper sense of the property." As they left the main part of town, Catherine noticed they were heading toward the foothills, where several of the larger mining operations were located. The road wound through stands of aspen and pine, with occasional clearings that revealed the scarred mountainsides where mining activities had stripped away the natural vegetation. "Samuel chose this location carefully," Crawford explained as they drove. "The house sits on a rise that overlooks both his main mining operation and provides a view of the entire valley. He always said a man should know what's happening on his land." The house that came into view was larger than Catherine had expected, a two-story log structure with a wraparound porch and multiple outbuildings. It had been built with both comfort and practicality in mind, with large windows to take advantage of the mountain views and a design that could withstand harsh winters. "Samuel had the east wing added last year," Crawford noted as they pulled up to the house. "He said he wanted proper space for a wife's activities and interests." Inside, the house revealed Samuel's preparations for married life with touching thoroughness. The main floor contained a spacious kitchen with modern conveniences, a formal dining room, a comfortable parlor, and what appeared to be an office or study. The East Wing addition housed a large room that had been set up as a combination library and workspace, with bookshelves, a substantial desk, and even scientific equipment for examining ore samples. "He called this your laboratory," Crawford said, gesturing to the specialized equipment. "Samuel believed you would want to be directly involved in assaying the ore quality." Catherine examined the setup with growing amazement. Samuel had invested considerable thought and expense in creating a space where she could participate meaningfully in the mining operations. It was far more comprehensive than anything she had imagined from his letters. "This is remarkable," she said, running her fingers along the polished surface of a microscope. "He really did see me as a full partner." Samuel was progressive in his thinking about women's capabilities. He often said that intelligence was too valuable to waste, regardless of whether it came in male or female form. Moving to the desk, Catherine noticed that its drawers were locked. "Do you have keys to Samuel's personal effects?" Crawford hesitated slightly. "Some areas of the house remain sealed pending resolution of the estate matters. Samuel's personal papers are included in that restriction." This struck Catherine as odd, given Crawford's claims about their partnership and his offer to make her Samuel's heir. Who imposed these restrictions? The territorial court, as part of the standard probate process. Until Samuel's will is formally read and his debts settled, certain items cannot be distributed. Catherine filed this information away, noting that it contradicted Crawford's earlier assurances about her inheritance being straightforward. When will the will be read? Next week, most likely. These matters take time in frontier territories. They continued through the house, with Crawford pointing out Samuel's preparations for married life. The master bedroom had been furnished with quality pieces, obviously chosen for a woman's comfort. A smaller room had been set up as a private sitting area with feminine touches that showed Samuel's consideration for his intended bride's needs. What struck Catherine most was the sense of permanence in Samuel's preparations. This wasn't a hasty arrangement made by a lonely bachelor, but a thoughtful creation of a home meant to last for decades. The care evident in every detail made his death seem even more tragic. "There's something else I want to show you," Crawford said, leading her outside toward the largest of the outbuildings. Samuel's mining office. The building contained maps, geological surveys, and mining equipment arranged with military precision. A large safe stood open in one corner, its contents apparently removed. Charts on the walls showed the layout of the Celestial Star Mine, with different colored pins marking various operational areas. "This is where Samuel kept his most sensitive business records," Crawford explained. "Unfortunately, the sheriff had to remove everything as part of his investigation." Catherine studied the empty safe, remembering Dr. Hartman's comments about missing ore samples. What exactly was taken? Assay reports, financial records, correspondence with potential investors, and Samuel's geological surveys of the surrounding area. Crawford's tone was casual, but Catherine detected underlying tension. Did the sheriff find anything relevant to the murder investigation? "He hasn't shared his findings with me yet, though I expect he'll provide updates as the case progresses." Catherine moved to examine the wall maps more closely. The Celestial Star Mine was clearly marked, but she noticed several other properties outlined in different colors. Samuel was interested in these other mining claims? Crawford joined her at the wall. Samuel believed in understanding the entire geological picture of the area. Those maps show all the significant mining operations within a 10-mile radius. Several of the outlined properties matched the names from Dr. Hartman's reports, mines that had recently changed ownership. Catherine made mental notes of the locations and owners listed on Samuel's maps. "Crawford, I'm curious about something Dr. Hartman mentioned. She said Samuel had concerns about unauthorized surveying on his property. Did he discuss this with you?" Crawford's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Samuel mentioned finding some survey markers that shouldn't have been there. We assumed they were left by previous property owners or perhaps placed by territorial surveyors updating their records. But he was concerned enough to investigate further. Samuel was thorough about protecting his interests. Any unauthorized activity on his property would naturally worry him." As they prepared to leave the mining office, Catherine noticed a small piece of paper partially hidden under a loose floorboard. She casually maneuvered to retrieve it while Crawford was securing the building. The paper contained a list of names written in Samuel's handwriting. V. Harrison, Denver Investor Group, M. Thornton, Territorial Mining Commissioner, J. Walsh. Land Acquisition Specialist, check financial connections, unusual capital sources. Catherine quickly tucked the paper into her reticule, her pulse quickening. Samuel had been investigating specific individuals connected to mining investments and land acquisitions. The fact that this list had been hidden suggested he was keeping his investigation secret. On the drive back to town, Crawford seemed preoccupied. "Catherine, I hope seeing Samuel's preparations helps you understand the opportunity available to you here. He invested considerable time and money in creating a life that included you as a full partner." "It's certainly impressive," Catherine agreed. though I'm still struggling with the irregularity of inheriting a life meant for someone else. Think of it not as inheriting someone else's life, but as fulfilling Samuel's vision for what your life together could have been. The only difference is that you would be working with me instead of being married to him. Catherine studied Crawford's profile as he concentrated on driving. May I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you so invested in having me stay and become your partner? Surely you could find other qualified people to help with the mining operations. Crawford was quiet for several moments. Samuel spoke of you as someone exceptional, not just intelligent, but possessed of uncommon integrity and determination. Those qualities are rare in any setting, but especially valuable in frontier business operations. That's flattering, but it doesn't fully answer my question. Crawford pulled the buggy to a stop at an overlook that provided a panoramic view of the Silverbrook Valley. The truth is, Catherine, that Samuel's death has left me in a precarious position. Our partnership was structured in a way that requires two principals to make major decisions about the mining operations. Without Samuel, I need a partner who can fulfill that legal requirement. This was a new piece of information. You mean you can't operate the mine alone? Not legally, no. Our partnership agreement was designed to prevent either of us from making unilateral decisions about the most valuable aspects of the operation. Samuel insisted on those provisions. Catherine began to understand Crawford's motivations more clearly. So you need me not just as a business partner, but as a legal necessity. I need you for both reasons. But Catherine, I want you to understand that this arrangement would benefit you as much as it benefits me. You would own a significant share of one of the most profitable mining operations in Colorado Territory. How significant a share? Crawford hesitated. That depends on how Samuel's will is structured and what arrangements he made for your inheritance. Catherine sensed there were still important details Crawford wasn't sharing. But you've seen his will? I've seen portions of it. Yes, Samuel was complex in his legal arrangements. As they resumed their journey to town, Catherine's mind worked through the implications of what she had learned. Crawford needed her for legal reasons related to their partnership structure, which explained his eagerness to have her stay. But it also raised questions about whether he was being completely honest about the terms of any inheritance she might receive. The hidden list of names she had found suggested that Samuel had been investigating a network of individuals involved in mining acquisitions. The presence of a territorial mining commissioner and land acquisition specialist indicated that any conspiracy might reach beyond simple claim, jumping into official corruption. Back in Silverbrook, Crawford escorted her to the hotel, where they found Sheriff Morrison waiting in the lobby. "Miss Mills, Mr. Crawford," the sheriff greeted them. "I was hoping to speak with both of you about Samuel's case." They moved to a private corner of the lobby, away from other guests. Sheriff Morrison withdrew a small notebook from his vest pocket. "We've made some progress in our investigation," he began. "We've identified the men who filed the fraudulent claims on Samuel's mining rights. They're part of a group that's been operating throughout the territory, targeting successful miners." "Have you arrested them?" Catherine asked. "Two of them, yes. But the leaders of the operation are still at large, and we have evidence that suggests this goes beyond simple claim jumping." Crawford leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" "The men we captured were carrying detailed maps and assay reports for dozens of mining operations throughout the territory. This wasn't random opportunism. It was a systematic effort to identify and acquire the most valuable mining properties." Catherine thought of the list she had found. "Sheriff, did Samuel ever mention his concerns about unauthorized surveying to you?" "He did, actually. Just a few days before his death, he came to my office asking about procedures for reporting suspected fraud in territorial mining records." "What did you tell him?" I advised him to gather solid evidence before making formal accusations. Mining. Disputes can get complicated, and accusations without proof tend to create more problems than they solve. Crawford shifted uncomfortably. Did Samuel indicate what kind of fraud he suspected? He believed someone was manipulating the territorial records to facilitate illegal property transfers. He mentioned having evidence of forged documents and falsified ownership claims. Catherine's pulse quickened. What happened to that evidence? That's what we're trying to determine. Samuel's mining office was thoroughly searched after his death, but we didn't find the specific documents he had described to me. Could they have been taken by his killers? Crawford asked. It's possible, or they might be hidden somewhere we haven't looked yet. Sheriff Morrison closed his notebook. Miss Mills, I'm wondering if Samuel might have mentioned any of these concerns in his letters to you. Catherine considered the letters she had received from Samuel. While they had focused primarily on their future life together, there had been occasional references to business challenges and territorial politics. He did mention some frustrations with territorial bureaucracy, but nothing specific about fraud or illegal activities. If you could review his letters and let me know if anything seems relevant, it would be helpful. Even small details might provide clues we haven't considered. After Sheriff Morrison departed, Crawford walked Catherine to the hotel dining room. This is becoming more complicated than I initially thought, he said as they settled at a table. How so? If Samuel was investigating territorial corruption, his death might have been ordered by people with significant power and resources. That makes the situation more dangerous for anyone associated with him. Catherine studied Crawford's expression. Are you suggesting I should leave Silverbrook for my own safety? I'm suggesting you should be aware of the risks involved in staying. If Samuel was killed because of what he knew, anyone continuing his investigation could face similar threats. Including you, Crawford nodded grimly. Including me. As his business partner, I'm automatically suspect in the eyes of whoever ordered his death. They ate in contemplative silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Catherine found herself increasingly convinced that Samuel's death was part of a larger conspiracy, but she was still uncertain about Crawford's role in the situation. His explanations were plausible, but something about his manner suggested he was holding back important information. After dinner, as they prepared to part ways, Crawford made an unexpected proposal. Catherine, would you be willing to accompany me to Denver next week? I need to meet with some of Samuel's business contacts, and I think it would be beneficial for you to understand the full scope of his operations. What kind of business contacts? Investors, mining equipment suppliers, and legal representatives who handled various aspects of our partnership. If you're going to inherit Samuel's interests, you should understand how the business relationships are structured. The trip would provide an opportunity to investigate Samuel's business dealings independently, away from Silverbrook's complex social dynamics. I think that would be educational, yes. Excellent. We'll take the morning stage on Tuesday, which gives us the weekend to prepare. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Catherine carefully examined the list of names she had found in Samuel's mining office. V. Harrison appeared to be connected to a Denver investor group, which aligned with Crawford's mention of business contacts in Denver. M. Thornton, the territorial mining commissioner, was someone she could potentially research through official channels. J. Walsh, the land acquisition specialist, was the most intriguing name. If Samuel suspected this person of facilitating illegal property transfers, Walsh might be a key figure in the conspiracy that had led to Samuel's death. Catherine retrieved her writing materials and began composing a letter to her former employer in Cincinnati, a lawyer who had connections throughout the Western Territories. If anyone could provide information about territorial officials and land acquisition specialists, it would be someone with legal experience in frontier business operations. As she wrote, Catherine reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed. A week ago, she was an unemployed woman traveling to marry a stranger. Now she was investigating a potential conspiracy that might involve territorial officials, mining investors, and systematic fraud. The irony wasn't lost on her that Samuel's death, tragic as it was, had provided her with a purpose and challenge. That was far more engaging than the domestic life she had originally sought. Whether she remained in Silverbrook or eventually returned east, she was determined to see justice done for the man who had offered her a new beginning. The question that troubled her most was whether James Crawford was an ally in this investigation, or another potential threat she needed to navigate carefully. His offer to take her to Denver could be an opportunity to uncover the truth, or it could be a way of removing her from Silverbrook before she learned too much about the conspiracy that had killed Samuel Hartwell. Tomorrow, she decided she would visit Dr. Hartman again and share what she had discovered. The female assayer had proven to be a valuable source of information, and Catherine suspected she might have insights into the names on Samuel's list that could prove crucial to understanding what Samuel had uncovered in his final weeks. The weekend passed quietly in Silverbrook, but Catherine's investigation continued in earnest. She had arranged to meet Dr. Hartman on Saturday morning, ostensibly to discuss ore processing techniques, but actually to share what she had discovered. At Samuel's house, the assayer's office provided a perfect cover for their conversation, as few people would question a potential mine owner consulting with the town's geological expert. "You found this hidden in Samuel's office?" Dr. Hartman examined the list of names Catherine had discovered, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This confirms what I suspected about his final investigation. Do you recognize any of these names?" "Monsieur Thornton, certainly. He's the Territorial Mining Commissioner who approves all major claim transfers and mining permits. If Samuel suspected him of corruption, that would explain why he was being so secretive about his investigation." Dr. Hartman moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a folder of official documents. "Look at this pattern of approvals over the past year. Thornton has fast-tracked dozens of mining claim transfers, often overriding local objections and bypassing normal review procedures. Catherine studied the documents, noting dates and signatures. These all involved properties that later proved to have valuable silver deposits. Exactly. It's as if someone had advanced knowledge of which claims would be most profitable and arranged for their acquisition before that information became public. Someone like J. Walsh, the land acquisition specialist? "Walsh is interesting," Dr. Hartman said, pulling out another set of papers. "He's been very active in Colorado Territory, but his background is mysterious. No one knows where his capital comes from or who his investors are." Catherine examined Walsh's property records, noting the pattern of acquisitions. He seems to specialize in purchasing claims from owners who are experiencing financial difficulties or facing legal challenges, or who die under suspicious circumstances, Dr. Hartman added quietly. 3 of the mining operations Walsh has acquired in the past year previously belonged to men who died in accidents or violent incidents. The implication was chilling. "You think Walsh is systematically eliminating mine owners to acquire their properties?" "I think Samuel suspected as much, and that suspicion got him killed." Dr. Hartman locked the documents back in her filing cabinet. "Catherine, I need to tell you something else. Yesterday, a man came to my office asking questions about you." Catherine's pulse quickened. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know about your relationship with Samuel, whether you had any knowledge of his business operations and how long. You planned to stay in Silverbrook, Dr. Hartman's expression was troubled. He claimed to be a journalist, writing about mail-order brides on the frontier, but something about him didn't ring true. Can you describe him? Average height, brown, hair, expensive clothes, but trying to appear casual. He had the soft hands of someone who doesn't do physical labor, but there was something hard about his eyes. Catherine filed this description away, adding it to her growing list of concerns. Did he give you a name? Robert Mitchell. But I doubt. That was real. He was too nervous when he said it, like he wasn't used to using that identity. The knowledge that someone was specifically investigating her activities added a new dimension of danger to Catherine's situation. If Walsh or his associates viewed her as a threat, she might face the same fate as Samuel. Dr. Hartman, I need to ask you about something else. James Crawford mentioned that he and Samuel had a partnership agreement that requires two principals for major decisions. Do you know anything about the legal structure of their arrangement? Dr. Hartman's expression became cautious. I know Samuel was very concerned about protecting his interests from potential partners who might try to seize control of his operations. He consulted with lawyers in Denver about creating ironclad agreements. But you don't know the specific terms? No, though Samuel did mention that he had built-in safeguards to prevent either partner from betraying the other. Catherine wondered what those safeguards might be and whether they were still relevant now that Samuel was dead. One more question. Do you think Crawford is involved in the conspiracy against Samuel? Dr. Hartman was quiet for a long moment. I want to believe he isn't. James has always seemed honest in his dealings with me, and Samuel trusted him. But trust is a dangerous luxury when dealing with the amounts of money involved in these mining operations. After leaving Dr. Hartman's office, Catherine decided to explore more of Silverbrook on her own. She walked through the residential areas, observing the homes of successful miners and businessmen. The disparity between the modest cabins of working miners and the substantial houses of mine owners was stark, illustrating the potential profits available to those who controlled the most productive claims. Near the edge of town, she discovered a small cemetery that predated the main burial ground, where Samuel had been interred. The older headstones told stories of the territory's early settlers, including several men who had died in mining accidents or frontier violence. Catherine noted that 3 of the graves belonged to men whose names appeared on Dr. Hartman's list, of former mine owners whose properties had been acquired by J. Walsh. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Walsh's business model seemed to involve identifying valuable mining properties and then arranging for their current owners to meet untimely deaths, allowing him to purchase the claims at reduced prices from desperate heirs or creditors. As Catherine made her way back toward the hotel, she noticed a man following her at a discreet distance. When she paused to examine a shop window, he stopped as well. When she turned a corner, he maintained his surveillance from across the street. Her heart rate increased as she realized this might be the same man who had questioned Dr. Hartman about her activities. Rather than leading her follower directly to the hotel, Catherine decided to test his intentions. She entered Morrison's General Store, which had multiple exits and would allow her to observe his behavior while appearing to shop casually. Inside the store, Catherine pretended to examine fabric while watching the street through the front window. The man positioned himself across the street with a clear view of the store's main entrance. His patient surveillance confirmed that he was indeed following her deliberately. Mrs. Morrison, the sheriff's wife, approached from behind the counter. "Miss Mills, how lovely to see you again. Are you settling in well?" "Quite well, thank you," Catherine replied, keeping her voice casual while continuing to monitor her follower. "Mrs. Morrison, I wonder if you might do me a small favor. There's a man across the street who's been following me, and I'd prefer not to lead him back to my hotel. Might there be a back exit I could use?" Mrs. Morrison glanced toward the window, her expression immediately becoming concerned. "Of course, dear. Through the storeroom and out the rear door, it leads to an alley that connects with the street behind the hotel." "Thank you. And Mrs. Morrison, if that man comes in asking about me, perhaps you could mention that I was inquiring about traveling back to Ohio." Mrs. Morrison's eyes sharpened with understanding. "Certainly. I'll be sure to tell him you seemed quite homesick and eager to return east." Catherine slipped through the storeroom and out the back door, making her way through alleys to approach the hotel from an unexpected direction. Once safely in her room, she positioned herself at the window to observe the street. The man remained in position for nearly an hour before finally departing, apparently convinced that she was still inside the general store. The incident confirmed that her investigation was attracting dangerous attention. Someone was sufficiently concerned about her activities to assign surveillance, which meant she was getting close to information they wanted to keep secret. That evening, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. A knock at her door revealed a young woman she recognized from Samuel's funeral, someone who had been among the group of miners offering condolences. "Miss Mills, I'm Sarah Winters, Pete Mackenzie's granddaughter. He asked me to speak with you privately." Catherine invited her in, curious about what message Pete might want to convey through his granddaughter rather than directly. Sarah was perhaps 25, with the practical manner of someone raised in a mining community. "Grandfather is worried. About you, Miss Mills. He says you've been asking questions that might get you hurt." "What kind of questions?" "The same questions Samuel was asking before he died, about who's buying up mining claims and why established miners are having so much trouble with claim jumpers and legal challenges." Sarah moved to the window, peering through the curtains as if checking for observers. "Grandfather wanted me to tell you something he couldn't say publicly. Samuel came to him the night before he died, scared and asking for advice about what to do with evidence he'd collected." Catherine's attention sharpened. "What evidence?" "Documents proving the territorial officials were taking bribes to approve fraudulent claim transfers. Samuel had bank records, forged signatures, and correspondence between the officials and the people paying them." "What did your grandfather advise him to do?" "To take everything to the federal authorities in Denver, bypass the territorial government entirely." Samuel was planning to leave for Denver the morning after he was killed. This explained why Samuel's evidence had disappeared from his mining office. He had been preparing to expose the conspiracy when his killers struck first. "Miss Mills," Sarah continued, "Grandfather also wanted you to know that Samuel didn't trust his business partner completely. He suspected Crawford might be involved in the land acquisition scheme, though he wasn't certain." Catherine felt a chill of fear. If Samuel had suspected Crawford, and if Crawford knew about those suspicions, that would explain his eagerness to keep Catherine close and control what she learned about Samuel's death. "Did Samuel share his suspicions with anyone besides your grandfather?" "Dr. Hartman, maybe." Samuel respected her intelligence and discretion, but he was being very careful about who he trusted in his final weeks. After Sarah departed, Catherine sat in her room, considering the implications of what she had learned. Samuel had collected evidence sufficient to expose the conspiracy and had been planning to take it to federal authorities when he was murdered. The evidence had disappeared, but the conspiracy continued. More troubling was the suggestion that Crawford might be involved in the scheme Samuel had been investigating. If that were true, Catherine's decision to accompany him to Denver could be walking directly into a trap. She spent Sunday morning composing careful letters to contacts in Ohio and Denver, sharing what she had learned without revealing too much detail in case the correspondence was intercepted. If something happened to her, she wanted there to be a record of her investigation that might help bring Samuel's killers to justice. Sunday afternoon brought another unexpected development. Sheriff Morrison appeared at her hotel room door, his expression grim. "Miss Mills, I need to speak with you about your safety. We've received information that suggests you may be in danger." Catherine invited him in, noting his obvious concern. "What kind of information?" "One of the men we arrested for the fraudulent claim filings has agreed to cooperate with our investigation. He's told us that there's a price on your head." Catherine's blood ran cold. "A price on my head? Someone has put out word that you're interfering with important business operations and need to be discouraged from continuing your investigation. The bounty is significant enough to attract serious attention." "Sheriff, I haven't been conducting any investigation. I've simply been trying to understand what happened to Samuel." Morrison's expression was skeptical. "Miss Mills, with all due respect, you've been asking questions all over town about mining operations, territorial officials, and suspicious deaths. That's an investigation by any reasonable definition." Catherine realized there was no point in denying what was obviously true. "Do you know who posted the bounty?" "Our informant doesn't know the specific individual, but he mentioned that the orders came from someone connected to high-level territorial officials. This confirmed the involvement of people with significant power and resources, exactly as Samuel had suspected. Sheriff, what do you recommend I do?" "Leave Silverbrook immediately. Take the first stage east and don't look back. This conspiracy involves people who won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens their operations." Catherine considered this advice seriously. The logical course of action would be to flee and let federal authorities handle the investigation. But the idea of abandoning Samuel's quest for justice and leaving his killers free to continue their operations was intolerable. "Sheriff, if I were to stay and continue trying to understand what happened to Samuel, would you be able to provide any protection?" Morrison shook his head. "Not against the kind of people we're dealing with. My authority ends at the town limits, and these folks have resources that extend well beyond my jurisdiction." "What about James Crawford? Do you think he's involved in the conspiracy?" The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "I don't have evidence either way, Miss Mills, but I will say that Crawford has been asking a lot of questions about what evidence we found at Samuel's mining office and what our investigation has uncovered." This was not reassuring. If Crawford was involved in the conspiracy, his offer to take her to Denver could be a way of removing her from any potential protection and placing her completely under his control. "Sheriff, I appreciate your warning. I need some time to consider my options." After Morrison left, Catherine realized that her investigation had reached a critical juncture. She could flee Silverbrook and abandon any hope of justice for Samuel, or she could continue pursuing the truth despite the escalating danger. The decision became clearer as she thought about Samuel's preparations for their life together, his trust in her intelligence and capability, and his final attempt to expose corruption that was destroying honest miners throughout the territory. He had died trying to bring justice to Colorado Territory. The least she could do was see his work completed, but she would need to be extraordinarily careful about how she proceeded. If Crawford was indeed involved in the conspiracy, the Denver trip could be a fatal mistake. On the other hand, Denver was where the federal authorities were located and where she might find allies capable of taking on the powerful forces behind Samuel's murder. Catherine made her decision. She would go to Denver with Crawford, but she would be prepared for the possibility that he was leading her into danger. She would carry copies of all the evidence she had collected, and she would make contact with federal authorities independent of whatever meetings Crawford had arranged. The mail-order bride who had come to Colorado seeking security was about to become a detective pursuing justice regardless of the personal cost. Samuel Hartwell's death would not go unavenged. and the conspiracy that had killed him would not be allowed to continue destroying innocent lives. But first, she needed to survive the journey to Denver and discover whether James Crawford was her ally or her enemy. The Tuesday morning stagecoach to Denver was crowded with businessmen, territorial officials, and travelers heading to Colorado's capital city. Catherine sat beside James Crawford, outwardly calm, but inwardly alert to every nuance of his behavior. The leather satchel at her feet contained copies of all the evidence she had gathered, along with detailed letters to federal authorities that she planned to deliver independently of Crawford's scheduled meetings. "You seem nervous," Crawford observed, as the stagecoach began its descent into the South Platte River Valley, where Denver sprawled across the plains. "It's my first time in a major western city," Catherine replied truthfully. "I'm not sure what to expect. Denver is more civilized than most people realize. The territorial government has attracted educated men from the back east, and the mining boom has created substantial wealth. You'll find it quite sophisticated." Catherine nodded, studying the approaching city through the dusty window. Denver was indeed impressive, with brick buildings, paved streets, and all the amenities of an established urban center. The territorial capitol building dominated the skyline, its dome gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Where will we be staying?" Catherine asked. "The Windsor Hotel. It's the finest establishment in the territory, and most of the men we'll be meeting conduct business there." Crawford's smile seemed genuine, but Catherine had learned to distrust appearances. "I've arranged separate rooms." Of course. The Windsor Hotel lived up to its reputation, with an elegant lobby, uniformed staff, and accommodations that rivaled anything Catherine had experienced in Ohio. Her room on the third floor provided a view of the busy street below, and multiple exits in case she needed to leave quickly. "Our first meeting is at 4 o'clock, Crawford informed her as they checked in. V. Harrison, the investor I mentioned. He was very interested in meeting Samuel's intended bride." Catherine's pulse quickened. V. Harrison was one of the names. From Samuel's hidden list, someone Samuel had suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. The fact that Crawford was taking her directly to meet a suspected conspirator could be evidence of his innocence or proof of his guilt. What should I expect from this meeting? Harrison represents a group of Eastern investors who provide capital for mining ventures. He's been interested in expanding his involvement with the Celestial Star Mine, and Samuel's death has obviously complicated those discussions. "Will you be present during the meeting?" Crawford hesitated. "Actually," Harrison requested to speak with you privately first. He's curious about your background and your intentions regarding Samuel's mining interests. This raised immediate red flags. Why would an investor want to meet with her privately, especially if Crawford was Samuel's legitimate business partner? Catherine kept her expression neutral while her mind raced through possibilities. "I see. And after I meet Harrison, we'll have dinner with him and some of his associates. Then tomorrow we'll meet with Samuel's lawyers to discuss the estate matters." Catherine spent the afternoon preparing for her encounter with Harrison. She dressed conservatively in her best traveling suit, concealed a small derringer that Dr. Hartman had insisted she carry, and made sure her evidence was hidden but accessible. Before leaving her room, she wrote a quick note explaining where she was going and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the federal marshal's office. The Windsor Hotel's business lounge was elegantly appointed, with leather chairs, mahogany tables, and the subdued atmosphere of serious financial discussions. V. Harrison was waiting when Catherine arrived, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothing that spoke of significant wealth. "Miss Mills, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Harrison's handshake was firm, his manner cordial but assessing. "Please, sit down. I've ordered tea." Catherine settled into the chair across from him, noting the way he positioned himself between her and the door. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you were interested in investing with Samuel's mining operation. Indeed, the Celestial Star Mine has tremendous potential, and Samuel was an excellent partner until his unfortunate death. Harrison poured tea with practiced ease. Now I find myself in an unusual situation, dealing with his intended bride rather than his widow. Mr. Crawford explained the legal complexities of the situation. Yes, Crawford has been very helpful in facilitating our discussions. He's assured me that you're prepared to honor Samuel's business commitments. Catherine sipped her tea carefully. I'm still learning about Samuel's business arrangements. Perhaps you could explain the nature of your investment relationship? Harrison's eyes sharpened slightly. Samuel needed capital for expanding his mining operations. My associates and I provided funding in exchange for a percentage of the mine's output and certain considerations regarding future development. What kind of considerations? Priority access to adjacent mining claims, consultation on major operational decisions, and the right to purchase additional shares if Samuel ever decided to sell. None of this sounded particularly suspicious, but Catherine sensed there were layers of meaning she wasn't grasping. And now that Samuel is dead? That depends on you, Miss Mills. If you're willing to honor his agreements, we can continue our profitable relationship. If not, Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, there are other ways to protect our investments. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Catherine maintained her composure while her mind raced. I'm curious about something, Mr. Harrison. How did you first learn about Samuel's mining operation? Through mutual business associates who recommended him as a reliable partner. Associates like J. Walsh? Harrison's cup rattled slightly against its saucer. Where did you hear that name? Samuel mentioned him in his correspondence. He seemed to think Walsh was involved in some questionable land acquisition practices. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Harrison set down his tea and leaned forward. Miss Mills, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the nature of our business relationships. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately. I'm comfortable discussing it here, Mr. Harrison. I'm afraid I must insist. Harrison gestured to two men who had quietly entered the lounge. These gentlemen will escort you to a more suitable location for our conversation. Catherine's heart hammered as she recognized the trap. These weren't business associates. They were enforcers sent to ensure she didn't leave the meeting alive. She glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of escape. I don't think that will be necessary, she said, reaching for her reticule where the derringer was concealed. Miss Mills, please don't make this more difficult than necessary. Harrison's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had turned cold. You've been asking too many questions about matters that don't concern you. It's time for that to stop. The two men moved closer, their hands inside their coats where weapons were obviously concealed. Catherine realized that calling for help would likely result in innocent bystanders being hurt, and the hotel staff would be no match for armed professionals. What happened to Samuel's evidence? She asked, stalling for time while looking for any opportunity to escape. What evidence? Harrison's tone was carefully neutral. The documents proving territorial corruption, the bank records showing illegal payments, the correspondence between officials and land acquisition specialists. Harrison's expression confirmed that she had struck home. You're remarkably well informed. For someone who supposedly came to Colorado to get married. Samuel trusted me with information about his investigation. Did you think killing him would make the evidence disappear? Actually, yes. Samuel was more careful than we anticipated about hiding his documentation, but we found most of it eventually. Harrison's smile was predatory. The question is what you know and who you've shared it with. Catherine realized this was a fishing expedition. They weren't certain what evidence she possessed or who her allies might be. I've shared everything with the appropriate authorities, Mr. Harrison. Killing me won't prevent the investigation from continuing. We'll see about that. The men were almost within arm's reach when the lounge door burst open. James Crawford entered, accompanied by a tall man with a federal marshal's badge. V. Harrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and murder, the marshal announced, drawing his weapon. Miss Mills, step away from those men. The two enforcers reached for their guns, but Crawford had anticipated their move. He tackled one while the marshal covered the other, shouting for hotel security. In the confusion, Catherine dove behind an overturned table, her heart racing as gunshots echoed through the elegant lounge. When the shooting stopped, both enforcers were on the floor, one dead and the other wounded. Harrison sat with his hands raised, his face pale with shock and fury. "How did you know?" he demanded, staring at Crawford. "Samuel left more evidence than you found," Crawford replied, helping Catherine to her feet, "including detailed records of your conspiracy that he gave to me for safekeeping." Catherine stared at Crawford in amazement. "You were working with federal authorities?" "From the beginning. Samuel suspected territorial corruption months ago and contacted federal marshals for help. We've been building a case against Harrison's network, but we needed more evidence to make arrests that would stick." Marshal Davis holstered his weapon and approached Harrison. "Vincent Harrison, you're charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud against the territorial government, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent." As Harrison was led away, Catherine sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "James, I don't understand. If you were working with federal authorities, why didn't you tell me?" "Because we weren't certain how much you knew or whether you could be trusted to maintain the investigation's secrecy. Samuel had mentioned that you had assisted with police work in Ohio, but we needed to verify your capabilities and loyalty. So everything, the partnership offer, the trip to Denver, even the meetings with Harrison, was part of an investigation." Crawford's expression grew more serious. "Not everything. The partnership offer was genuine, Catherine. Samuel's will does leave you a significant share of the mining operation, and I do need a partner to continue operating legally. But yes, we used your presence to draw Harrison and his associates into the open." Catherine felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that Crawford wasn't part of the conspiracy. Anger that she had been manipulated and used as bait without her knowledge or consent. "You could have told me," she said. "I would have cooperated willingly." "We considered it, but federal policy requires that civilian participants in undercover operations be kept uninformed to prevent them from inadvertently compromising the investigation." Marshal Davis approached them. "Miss Mills, I owe you an apology. Using you as an unknowing decoy was risky, but your natural investigative instincts and the questions you asked around Silverbrook helped us identify other members of the conspiracy. What happens now? We have enough evidence to arrest the entire network, including territorial officials who accepted bribes and the land acquisition specialists who facilitated the illegal transfers. Your fiancé's death will be avenged, and the conspiracy that killed him will be dismantled." Catherine thought about Samuel's final weeks, his growing concern about territorial corruption, and his determination to expose the truth despite the personal danger. "He would have been pleased to know his investigation succeeded." "Actually," Crawford said quietly, "he did know. Samuel was working directly with federal authorities in his final weeks. He knew the risks, but he was determined to see justice done. This revelation cast Samuel's death in a new light. He hadn't been killed because he had stumbled onto a conspiracy, but because he had deliberately chosen to expose it despite knowing the danger. The evidence he collected, did it survive? Most of it. Samuel was smart enough to create multiple copies and hide them in different locations. The documents they found in his mining office were decoys. Marshal Davis consulted his pocket watch. "Miss Mills, we'll need your testimony for the trials, But that can wait until you've had time to recover from today's events. Mr. Crawford, are you prepared to provide the additional evidence Samuel left in your custody? Absolutely, Marshal. It's all secured in my hotel room. As the federal authorities finished their work and hotel staff began cleaning up the damaged lounge, Catherine found herself alone with Crawford. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and emotionally drained. James, I need to ask you something directly. Is any part of your partnership offer real, or was it all part of the investigation? Crawford met her gaze steadily. It's real, Catherine. Samuel's will does make you a significant heir to his mining interests, and I do need a partner to continue. Operating legally, the federal investigation is complete, but our business relationship is just beginning. And if I choose not to stay in Colorado, then I'll respect your decision and help you liquidate your inherited assets so you can return east with financial security. Catherine considered her options. She could return to Ohio with enough money to live comfortably, putting the violence and danger of Colorado behind her. Or she could remain in Silverbrook and help build the mining operation Samuel had envisioned, honoring his memory by continuing his work. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary week that had transformed her from a displaced mail-order bride into a participant in a federal investigation. Samuel's death had been tragic, but his work had ultimately succeeded in bringing down a conspiracy that had terrorized honest miners throughout Colorado Territory. The question now was what to do with the life and opportunity Samuel had provided her. She could return to the safety and familiarity of Ohio, or she could embrace the challenge and independence of frontier life in Colorado. As she prepared for bed, Catherine realized that Samuel's greatest gift to her might not have been the financial inheritance or the mining partnership, but the discovery of her own capabilities and courage. For the first time in her life, she had been a full participant in something that mattered, using her intelligence and determination to help achieve justice. Tomorrow, she would make her decision about the future, but tonight she allowed herself to grieve for the man who had offered her a new beginning and whose faith in her abilities had been vindicated in ways neither of them could have imagined. Outside her window, Denver settled into evening quiet, but Catherine's mind was already turning towards Silverbrook and the life Samuel had envisioned for them there. The conspiracy that had killed him was defeated, but the work of building something meaningful from his legacy was just beginning. The federal courthouse in Denver buzzed with activity as the Harrison conspiracy trials began. Catherine found herself at the center of the prosecution's case, her testimony crucial to establishing the pattern of murders and fraud that had terrorized Colorado Territory's mining community. The past week had been a whirlwind of depositions, evidence review, and preparation sessions with federal prosecutors. Miss Mills, please tell the court how you first became aware of irregularities in territorial mining operations, Prosecutor Jonathan Hayes requested as Catherine took the witness stand. Catherine looked out at the packed courtroom, noting the faces of the accused men who had orchestrated Samuel's death. V. Harrison sat with his legal team, his expression coldly defiant. Beside him were M. Thornton, the corrupt territorial mining commissioner, and J. Walsh, the land acquisition specialist whose name had appeared on Samuel's hidden list. I discovered documents in my deceased fiancé's possession that suggested systematic fraud in mining claim transfers, Catherine began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. These documents indicated that territorial officials were accepting bribes to approve fraudulent property transfers, often after the legitimate owners had died under suspicious circumstances. How did Mr. Hartwell obtain these documents? Through months of careful investigation, Samuel suspected that his mining operation was being targeted for acquisition, and he began researching the business practices of individuals involved in similar transactions throughout the territory. Catherine spent the next hour detailing Samuel's investigation, the pattern of deaths among successful mine owners, and the discovery of the conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Her testimony was supported by boxes of evidence that Samuel had carefully preserved, including bank records, forged documents, and correspondence between the conspirators. During cross-examination, Harrison's attorney attempted to portray Catherine as an opportunistic outsider who had fabricated evidence to claim an inheritance she wasn't entitled to. "Miss Mills, isn't it true that you came to Colorado seeking financial gain through marriage to a wealthy mine owner?" "I came to Colorado seeking a partnership with an honorable man," Catherine replied firmly. "The financial aspects were secondary to finding security and mutual respect. And when you discovered Mr. Hartwell was dead, you saw an opportunity to claim his wealth through fraudulent conspiracy theories?" Catherine met the attorney's gaze directly. "I saw an opportunity to seek justice for a good man who was murdered by criminals who thought they could steal what he had built through honest work." The attorney's aggressive questioning continued for another hour, but Catherine's calm, factual responses undermined his attempts to discredit her testimony. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, she felt drained but satisfied that she had honored Samuel's memory and contributed to bringing his killers to justice. James Crawford testified the following day, revealing the full scope of the federal investigation that had been underway for months before Samuel's death. His testimony established that Samuel had voluntarily cooperated with federal authorities, knowing the risks but determined to expose the corruption that was destroying honest mining operations throughout the territory. Mr. Hartwell understood that his investigation had made him a target, Crawford testified. He took precautions to preserve evidence and ensure that his death wouldn't prevent the conspiracy from being exposed. The defense attorneys fought vigorously, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed payments from Harrison's investment group to territorial officials. Forged documents bore the signatures of men who had been murdered for their mining claims. Correspondence between the conspirators detailed their methods for identifying valuable properties and eliminating their owners. On the final day of testimony, Dr. Elizabeth Hartman took the stand to explain the geological evidence that had first alerted Samuel to the conspiracy. The pattern of ore discoveries following property transfers was statistically impossible to occur naturally, she testified. Someone with access to confidential geological surveys was identifying the most valuable claims and arranging for their acquisition through fraud or violence. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. V. Harrison was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. M.C. Thornton received 20 years for corruption and fraud. J. Walsh, as the architect of the land acquisition scheme, was sentenced to hang. After the verdicts were announced, Catherine found herself surrounded by reporters seeking details about the mail-order bride who had helped expose territorial corruption. She declined most interviews, preferring to let the court record speak for itself. "Miss Mills, what are your plans now that justice has been served?" one persistent reporter asked as she left the courthouse. "I'm returning to Silverbrook to build the life Samuel envisioned," Catherine replied simply. The train journey back to Colorado's mining country gave Catherine time to reflect on the extraordinary month that had transformed her life. She had come west, seeking security through marriage, and instead found purpose through investigation and justice. Samuel's death had been tragic, but his legacy would live on through the mining operation they would have built together and the corruption he had helped expose. James Crawford met her at the Denver station with surprising news. "Catherine, there have been some interesting developments in Silverbrook while we've been dealing with the trials." What kind of developments? 3 mining operations that were illegally acquired through Harrison's conspiracy are being returned to their rightful owners or heirs. The territorial government is also implementing new regulations to prevent similar fraud in the future. As their train climbed into the mountains towards Silverbrook, Crawford shared more details about the changes taking place throughout Colorado Territory. The federal investigation has created opportunities for honest miners who were driven out by the conspiracy. Several operations are looking for experienced partners to help rebuild their businesses. Catherine watched the familiar landscape roll past the train windows. Are you suggesting we expand beyond Samuel's original mining operation? I'm suggesting we consider Samuel's broader vision for supporting honest mining throughout the territory. He believed that successful operations had a responsibility to help their neighbors prosper as well. This perspective on Samuel's character resonated with what Catherine had learned about him through their correspondence and the testimony of those who had known him. He hadn't been content simply to build his own wealth, but had sought to create conditions where others could succeed. As well, what would that look like in practical terms? We could provide consulting services to smaller mining operations, share geological expertise, and offer fair financing for equipment and development. Essentially, we could be the honest alternative to Harrison's predatory investment group. The idea appealed to Catherine's desire to honor Samuel's memory while building something meaningful for the future. It would require significant expansion of our operations. Yes, but we have the capital foundation from Samuel's mining assets, and there's tremendous demand for legitimate business services in the territory. As the train pulled into Silverbrook Station, Catherine was surprised to see a crowd of people waiting on the platform. Word of the trial verdicts and her testimony had apparently reached the mining community, and many residents had come to welcome her return. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward as she disembarked. Miss Mills, on behalf of Silverbrook and the entire territory, I want to thank you for your courage in pursuing justice for Samuel and all the miners who were victimized by this conspiracy. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman pushed through the crowd to embrace Catherine warmly. My dear, you've done something remarkable. Samuel would be so proud of what you've accomplished. Pete Mackenzie, the elderly miner who had first warned Catherine about the dangers of asking too many questions, approached with tears in his eyes. Miss, you've given us something we thought we'd lost forever. The belief that honest folks can get justice against powerful criminals. The outpouring of gratitude and support from the community was overwhelming. Catherine realized that her investigation hadn't just solved Samuel's murder, but had restored faith in justice and honest dealing throughout the mining district. That evening, at a community dinner organized to celebrate the trial verdicts, Catherine stood to address the crowd that had gathered in the church social hall. Friends, I want to thank you for your support and kindness during these difficult weeks. Samuel Hartwell was a man I never had the chance to know in life, but through your memories and his own preparations for our future together, I've come to understand his character and values. She paused, looking out at faces that had become familiar and dear during her brief time in Silverbrook. Samuel believed in justice, honesty, and the responsibility of successful people to help their neighbors prosper. I've decided to remain in Silverbrook and work with James Crawford to continue Samuel's vision, not just for his own mining operation, but for the entire community. The applause was thunderous, and Catherine felt a warmth and belonging she had never experienced in Ohio. This rough mining town had become home in ways she could never have anticipated. After the dinner, as people began to disperse to their homes, Crawford approached Catherine with a question that had been weighing on his mind. Catherine, I need to ask you something important. Are you staying in Silverbrook because you feel obligated to honor Samuel's memory, or because you genuinely want to build a life here? Catherine considered the question carefully. Both, I think. I do feel an obligation to complete what Samuel started, but I also feel more alive and engaged here than I ever did in Ohio. This place has given me purpose and challenged me in ways I never expected. And our partnership. Are you comfortable with the business relationship we're proposing? James, I've learned that I have capabilities I never knew existed. Working with you to build something meaningful from Samuel's legacy feels like the natural continuation of a journey I began when I responded to his advertisement. Crawford smiled with obvious relief. Then let's discuss the specific terms of our partnership. Samuel's will leaves you 40% ownership of the Celestial Star Mine, along with the house and surrounding property. I propose we formalize our business relationship with a comprehensive agreement that protects both our interests while allowing us to expand into the broader mining consultation services we discussed. What about the house? Samuel prepared it for a wife, not a business partner. The house is yours, Catherine. Samuel intended it for you, and that intention should be honored regardless of changed circumstances. The generosity of this gesture touched Catherine deeply. You're certain about this? Absolutely. Samuel wanted you to have security and independence. Living in the house he prepared will provide both. Over the following weeks, Catherine and Crawford worked with territorial attorneys to formalize their partnership agreement. The legal documents were comprehensive, establishing clear responsibilities and profit-sharing arrangements while protecting both parties' interests. Catherine also began the process of truly settling into Silverbrook society. She joined the church, auxiliary, volunteered to teach mathematics at the town school, and began hosting informal gatherings for the wives and daughters of mining families. Dr. Hartman proved to be a particularly valuable friend and advisor, helping Catherine understand the technical aspects of mining operations and geological assessment. Together, they established a small laboratory where ore samples could be analyzed, accurately and honestly, providing services that had previously required expensive trips to Denver. You're creating exactly what this community needed, Dr. Hartman observed as they worked together on setting up the equipment. Honest, local expertise that miners can trust. It feels like the natural extension of what Samuel was trying to accomplish, Catherine replied, adjusting the focus on a microscope. He believed that knowledge and resources should be shared to benefit everyone. The partnership between Catherine and Crawford proved remarkably successful. Their consulting services attracted clients from throughout the territory, and the Celestial Star Mine continued to produce at record levels. More importantly, their fair dealing and honest practices began to restore confidence in the mining industry that had been badly damaged by the Harrison conspiracy. 6 months after the trials, Catherine received a letter from the territorial governor formally thanking her for her role in exposing the corruption that had plagued Colorado's mining operations. The letter also included an invitation to serve on a new territorial commission responsible for regulating mining practices and preventing future fraud. "It's an honor I never could have imagined," Catherine told Crawford as they reviewed the invitation in their shared office. "A year ago, I was unemployed and desperate. Now I'm being asked to help govern a territory." "Samuel saw something special in you from your letters," Crawford replied. "He would be amazed by what you've accomplished, but not surprised. You've simply become the person he recognized you had the potential to be." That evening, Catherine walked through the house Samuel had prepared for their marriage, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. The rooms he had furnished with such care now reflected her own personality and interests, filled with geological specimens, legal texts, and correspondence from mining operations throughout the territory. In the study, where Samuel had planned for her to work alongside him, Catherine sat at the desk he had chosen and began drafting her acceptance letter for the Territorial Commission appointment. As she wrote, she felt Samuel's presence in the careful attention to detail he had put into preparing for their life together. The mail-order bride who had traveled west to marry a stranger had instead become a businesswoman, investigator, and now territorial official. It wasn't the life either she or Samuel had originally envisioned, but it was a life built on the foundation of his faith in her abilities and her determination to honor his memory through meaningful work. Outside her window, the lights of Silverbrook twinkled in the valley below, and Catherine knew she was exactly where she belonged. 2 years had passed since Catherine Mills first stepped off the stagecoach in Silverbrook, Colorado territory, expecting to marry Samuel Hartwell. Now, as she stood in the parlor of the house he had prepared for their marriage, she marveled at how dramatically her life had evolved from those initial, tragic circumstances. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated geological maps spread across the mahogany table, territorial correspondence stacked neatly on Samuel's former desk, and framed photographs of mining operations throughout Colorado that had benefited from the consulting services she and James Crawford had established. The room bore the marks of serious business activity, yet retained the comfortable warmth Samuel had envisioned for a family home. A knock at the front door interrupted her morning review of territorial commission reports. Catherine opened it to find Rebecca Martinez, a young woman whose family had recently arrived from New Mexico territory seeking opportunities in Colorado's expanding mining industry. "Miss Mills, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Rebecca said, clutching a leather portfolio. "Mr. Crawford suggested I speak with you about our family's mining claim situation." Catherine invited her in, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs in the parlor. Over the past 2 years, her home had become an informal meeting place for miners seeking honest advice and assistance, a role that felt natural and fulfilling. "Please, tell me about your family's circumstances," Catherine said, settling across from the earnest young woman. Rebecca's story was familiar, yet unique. Her father had discovered promising silver deposits on their claim, but lacked the capital and expertise needed for proper development. Local investors had made offers that seemed generous, but contained terms that would ultimately strip the family of ownership rights. "We don't want to lose our land the way so many families did during the Harrison conspiracy," Rebecca explained. "But we also can't develop the mine without help," Catherine nodded, recognizing the dilemma that honest mining families faced throughout the territory. "Have you had the ore samples properly assayed?" Dr. Hartman examined them last week. She said the deposits are substantial enough to support a profitable operation if developed correctly. This was exactly the type of situation that Crawford and Mills Mining Consultants had been established to address. Catherine opened a folder containing standard partnership agreements they had developed for small mining operations. "Rebecca, we've created a program specifically for families in your situation. Instead of selling to outside investors who might not have your best interests in mind, we can provide the capital and expertise you need while ensuring your family retains majority ownership of the claim." Rebecca's eyes widened with hope. "What would the terms involve?" Catherine explained the partnership structure that had proven successful with dozens of small mining operations. Crawford and Mills would provide initial capital, technical assistance, and access to markets in exchange for a minority share of profits until the loan was repaid, after which the partnership would convert to a consulting relationship. "The key difference from traditional investment arrangements," Catherine emphasized, "is that your family maintains control of all major decisions and builds equity rather than becoming employees on your own land." As they discussed the specific terms, Catherine reflected on how naturally she had adapted to these business negotiations. The analytical skills that had once made her seem odd in Ohio society had become invaluable assets in Colorado's mining industry. After Rebecca departed with partnership documents to review with her family, Catherine prepared for her weekly meeting with James Crawford at their shared office in Silverbrook's business district. The building they had purchased and renovated housed not only their consulting firm, but also Dr. Hartman's expanded assaying laboratory and a small lending library focused on mining and geological texts. Crawford was waiting with the quarterly reports that had become routine aspects of their thriving business. "The Martinez family situation looks promising," he said, as Catherine settled behind her desk. "Dr. Hartman's assay results suggest their claim could be one of the most profitable small operations in the territory. Rebecca seems like a sensible young woman who will make good decisions for her family's interests," Catherine observed. "I think they'll be excellent partners." Crawford nodded, then shifted to a more significant topic. "Catherine, I've received an interesting proposition from the territorial capital. Governor Mitchell wants to know if you'd consider appointment as the territory's first female mining commissioner." Catherine set down her pen, surprised by the magnitude of the opportunity. "That would be a considerable responsibility." "Yes, but you've already been serving informally in that capacity through your territorial commission work. This would simply formalize your authority and expand your ability to protect honest miners from fraudulent schemes. The position would require relocating to Denver for part of each year and taking on regulatory responsibilities that extended far beyond their current consulting practice. Yet it also represented the ultimate vindication of Samuel's faith in her capabilities and judgment. What would happen to our partnership if I accepted? We'd adapt. The consulting firm is well established now, and I could manage day-to-day operations while you handle territorial policy matters. In many ways, it would expand our influence rather than diminish it." Catherine considered the implications. "I'd want to maintain our commitment to the small mining operations we're already supporting." "Absolutely. If anything, having official authority would help us protect them more effectively." That afternoon, Catherine rode out to the Celestial Star mine to visit the operation that had been the foundation of her Colorado life. The mine continued to produce at record levels, but it was no longer her primary focus. The broader work of supporting honest mining throughout the territory had become her true calling. At the mine office, she reviewed the monthly production reports and worker safety records that Crawford and Mills had established as industry standards. Their insistence on proper safety equipment and fair wages had initially been viewed as impractical idealism, but the resulting low accident rates and high worker loyalty had proven the business value of ethical practices. Mine foreman Tom Bradley, who had worked for Samuel and stayed on after his death, approached with the weekly geological survey. "Miss Mills, we've identified some promising new veins in the eastern section. Do you want to examine the samples?" Catherine spent an hour reviewing the ore samples and geological data, using skills that Dr. Hartman had helped her develop over the past 2 years. The analysis confirmed significant silver deposits that could extend the mine's productive life for decades. "Tom, let's schedule a full survey of the eastern section next month. If these deposits are as substantial as they appear, we'll need to plan for expanded operations." As she prepared to leave the mine, Catherine paused at the small memorial marker they had erected for Samuel near the office building. The inscription read simply, "Samuel Hartwell, honest miner, community builder, seeker of justice. I think you'd be pleased with what we've built from your foundation," she said quietly, placing fresh wildflowers at the base of the marker. The evening brought a community gathering at the church to celebrate the engagement of Pete Mackenzie's granddaughter Sarah to one of the young miners whose family had benefited from Crawford and Mills' consulting services. These social occasions had become important parts of Catherine's life in Silverbrook, providing connections to the community that Samuel had hoped she would join. As she mingled with friends and neighbors, Catherine was struck by how completely she had been accepted into Silverbrook society. The suspicion and curiosity that had initially surrounded the mysterious mail-order bride had evolved into genuine respect and affection from people who valued her contributions to their communities. Prosperity and stability. Dr. Hartman approached with a glass of punch and an expression of maternal pride. "Catherine, I have news that I think will interest you. The Colorado School of Mines has asked me to recommend candidates for their new program training women in geological and mining engineering." That's wonderful progress for women's education. In technical fields, I've recommended 3 young women from mining families, including Rebecca Martinez. They have the mathematical background and practical experience needed to succeed in such a program. Catherine smiled at the thought of women like Rebecca having opportunities that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. Samuel would have supported that kind of educational advancement. He would have been particularly pleased to see the influence you've had in creating those opportunities. As the evening continued, Catherine found herself in conversation with Sheriff Morrison, who had become a trusted friend and occasional advisor on territorial commission matters. "Catherine, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said, drawing her aside from the main group. "With all the changes that have happened since the Harrison conspiracy trials, I've been thinking about retiring from law enforcement and focusing on my ranch. That sounds like a well-deserved rest after all your years of service. Perhaps, but I'm concerned about who might replace me. The mining industry's growth has attracted some unsavory characters, and Silverbrook needs a sheriff who understands the complexities of territorial politics and business fraud." Catherine sensed where this conversation was heading. "You think the position requires someone with experience in both law enforcement and mining industry investigations?" Exactly. Someone with the analytical skills to recognize complex fraud, schemes, and the community connections to maintain public trust. The suggestion that she might consider the sheriff's position was both flattering and daunting. Catherine had never imagined herself in law enforcement, yet her investigation of Samuel's murder had proven she had the necessary skills and temperament. "Ben, I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm already considering the territorial mining commissioner appointment. I'm not sure I could handle both responsibilities effectively. Think about it, Catherine. You've already been serving as an unofficial law enforcement consultant on mining-related crimes throughout the territory. This would simply formalize that role." The conversation was interrupted by James Crawford, who approached with obvious excitement. "Catherine, I've just received a telegram from Denver. The territorial legislature has unanimously approved funding for a new mining fraud investigation division, and they want you to head the department." Catherine stared at him in amazement. "A dedicated anti-fraud division with full territorial authority to investigate suspicious mining claims, prosecute territorial officials who accept bribes, and protect honest miners from predatory investment schemes." It's exactly what Samuel was working toward when he was killed. The offer represented the culmination of everything Catherine had learned and accomplished since arriving in Colorado. It would allow her to continue Samuel's work on a territorial scale while building on the reputation she had established through her investigation and business success. What would this mean for our consulting partnership? We'd need to restructure it to avoid conflicts of interest, but the work we've been doing would continue under official territorial authority. Instead of helping individual miners through private consulting, you'd be protecting all miners through regulatory enforcement. That night, alone in the house Samuel had prepared for their marriage, Catherine walked through rooms that had become thoroughly her own while still honoring his memory. The study where he had planned for her to work alongside him now contained territorial law books and investigative files. The bedroom he had furnished for their wedding night had become her private retreat, decorated with geological specimens and photographs of successful mining operations they had helped establish. In the kitchen, where Samuel had envisioned their domestic life, Catherine made tea and sat at the table, where she now wrote territorial reports and correspondence with mining families throughout Colorado. The life she had built was different from anything either she or Samuel had originally imagined, but it felt like the natural evolution of the partnership he had proposed. The next morning brought her decision. Catherine wrote formal letters accepting the position as head of the Territorial Mining Fraud Investigation Division and agreeing to serve as a special advisor to the Territorial Mining Commission. She would maintain her residence in Silverbrook and her connection to the community that had become home, while expanding her work to protect honest miners throughout Colorado Territory. She also wrote to the Colorado School of Mines, offering to establish a scholarship fund for women pursuing geological and mining engineering education, funded through the profits from the Celestial Star mine that Samuel had left her. As she sealed the letters, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from desperate unemployment in Ohio to positions of territorial authority in Colorado. The mail-order bride arrangement that had seemed like her last hope for security had instead become the foundation for a life of purpose and influence she could never have imagined. Samuel Hartwell had offered her partnership in marriage and mining. His death had transformed that offer into something larger and more meaningful: partnership in building justice and opportunity throughout Colorado Territory. The legacy they had created together would continue long after both their names were forgotten, in the honest miners who prospered, the corrupt officials who were prosecuted, and the young women who would follow Catherine's example into careers previously reserved for men. That afternoon, as Catherine prepared to travel to Denver to begin her new territorial position, she made one final visit to Samuel's grave in the Silverbrook Cemetery. The wildflowers she had planted around his marker were blooming in vibrant colors that brightened the mountain landscape. "Thank you, Samuel," she said quietly, "for seeing possibilities in me that I didn't know existed, and for starting something that has grown far beyond what either of us dreamed." As she rode back toward town and the stagecoach that would carry her to her new responsibilities, Catherine Mills, no longer a mail-order bride but a respected territorial official, looked forward to continuing the work that had given her life, meaning and purpose. The partnership with Samuel Hartwell had ended before it truly began, but the partnership with his vision for justice and honest dealing would continue for as long as she drew breath. The mail-order bride had found her true calling not in marriage, but in carrying forward the dreams of the man who had believed in her potential when she had lost faith in herself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.